Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the MYAN Deloitte Access Report Launch, COVID-19 and Young Migrants, Impacts and Solutions. Lovely to have you all joining us. We're going to try and start on time because we have a lot to get through today, and we'll let people in as they came in. So, hello, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Carmel Guerra. I'm the chair of MYAN Australia and also CEO of the MYAN partner in Victoria, CMY. And I'm one of your moderators today, alongside the wonderful Matika Shakur, who you can see on screen, who is MYAN's relatively new Youth Leadership and Advocacy Officer. So we hope this today will be both incredibly informative, dynamic event for you. But I would like to begin, of course, before we start official proceedings, to acknowledge the lands across Australia on which we are all meeting today, the lands of Australia's First Nations, representing hundreds of clans and language groups. We respectively acknowledge elders past and present and their connection to land, sea and community, and thank you for those that are joining us. We work towards reconciliation with and self-determination for the First Nations people. And I am in Victoria, so I would like to acknowledge that I'm by the banks of the Mary Creek on Wurundjeri land in Melbourne's northern suburbs, and pay my respects and acknowledge the many lands on which all of our speakers are on across Australia. Well, I think also in light of what's going on around Australia and the world, it would be remiss of me to not acknowledge that many of us probably in this room today have connections with Afghanistan, and just want to acknowledge the tragic events over there and pass our condolences to anybody connected, and wish that there is some way that Australia continues to play its role in supporting Afghanistan. And secondly, also to acknowledge that, and it sounds a bit unusual because Melbourne has been in lockdown for a very long time, that there are many of you in lockdown across Australia, and acknowledge that as well, and the impact that is having on many of you. We know with those of us that work with young people, but to also acknowledge we are all doing this for the betterment of the better health of the Australian community. So thank you everybody for doing that. Okay, on that rather somber note though, I will try and continue the purpose of today. As you know, the COVID-19 and pandemic has affected the lives of everyone in Australian community in very acute and unpredictable ways. Employment in particular has been profoundly impacted by the measures undertaken to respond to the virus. The long-term impact of youth unemployment is likely to be very severe, given that young people aged 15 to 24 are already 3 times more likely to be unemployed or underemployed than those over 25. Australia's young people already face multiple challenges in entering and maintaining secure employment before this pandemic. Now, the intersection of being both young and from a refugee or migrant background has meant that this group of young people are facing additional barriers, leaving them particularly vulnerable to long-term market exclusion and economic shock. Almost 50% of young people living in Australia are from a migrant or refugee background. However, data collection on their economic participation and employment outcomes is sparse. MYAN has been concerned about this for a long time and wanted to respond to this gap in the data to look at the employment outcomes. So to do this, we engage no better than Deloitte Access Economics to contribute on helping us develop this evidence base. So we are really pleased that we are able to launch this collaboration today, because we know from our work, and many of you who are listening today would know from your work, that economic participation in secure employment is fundamental to the successful settlement of all migrants and refugees. And we know, particularly for young people who often are the anchor or the reason why migrants come to Australia, need to find work to make them feel part of the Australian community. This report has some very interesting and important findings that we will share with you today that the panel will speak to. And I really want to highlight the crucial work that is helping us to identify employment-related inequity and disadvantage for this group of young people, and how important this data collection process is in really forming evidence-based policy development that ensures employment programs and economic participation in the future is targeted to ensure that these young people contribute to the workforce. I'll leave it there as my introductory remarks, and I'm going to hand over to Martika, who's going to take you through some of the protocols for today's events. Over to you, Martika.
Thanks, Carmel. Just acknowledging as well that I'm calling in from Melbourne, so specifically Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri land, and welcoming any of the members who may be here today as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. The meeting will be recorded, although you can only see us, your videos and audios will be off. To communicate with us, you can use either the chat box or the Q&A function. Both of those should be at the bottom of your screen. The chat function is mainly just for commentary purposes, if you'd like to share any links and resources with us. And the Q&A specifically, you can use that for questions that you'd like to put to the panel. And the Q&A will happen at the end towards the end of this session, and we'll get to that about closer to 3 o'clock when this is supposed to come to an end. But Carmel, I'll leave it there and hand it back to you to introduce some of the panel members we have today. And you're on mute again, sorry.
I'm on mute again. That's the that is the sentence of the decade I mentioned, and it's worse when you're moderating, Martika, is it not, that you need to be on top of that? So I want to introduce you to some of the panel members that are here. Then Martika will outline the day. So we have the pleasure today to hear and to actually launch the report, the wonderful Alison Larkins, who's probably known to many of you, who is the Coordinator General, see if I can get my tongue right, for migrant services from the Department of Home Affairs. We also have David Rubens, who has led this from Deloitte Access, who is the Deloitte Access Economic Partner, and he will talk to you very shortly. We also have, on cue, he arrives. We also have Ines Willocks, the Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group, who will reference what this means, what are these issues meaning for industry. And we also then have a couple of young people that Martika's going to talk to you about.
Yeah, great. So we have Yusuf here with us, as well as Fatima. Yusuf is a young entrepreneur from Melbourne, and Fatima currently works in the finance industry, and she's also the MYAN State Ambassador for South Australia. So they're here to sort of share their experiences and what it's been like in finding employment, if it's been, and if the report really speaks to their experience as well. So we'll hear a little bit from them later in the session, but we'll start off. Carmel, I'll hand back to you to sort of get it going with David's presentation. Yeah,
lovely. So really what we're going to do now is ask David to speak to you. We did say that we have a lot to share with you, and the link to the report will be available after today's session. But David's going to try and give you an overview. Then we're going to hear from Alison. Then we want to hear from Yusuf and Fata about what that means. And then we're going to go to Ines to really get a perspective from industry. So we really want you to be thinking through the kind of questions you want to ask. So again, pop them into the chat and the questions and answers, and we'll make this as interactive as possible. So can I now hand over to David Rubens, who is a senior partner at Deloitte Access Economics with macroeconomics practice, and has over 2 decades of experience with this firm, consulting firm. David has expertise in macroeconomic analysis and forecasting, labour market analysis, and public policy, including migration. And he is the lead author of this report. So with no further ado, over to you, David.
Thank you, Carmel. It was quite a mouthful in the introduction there. Thank you so much for that. And thanks, Martika. And thanks to everyone for joining today. I can see there's a large number of you online. Thank you for your interest in this important subject, and for giving up your time to listen and hopefully also to participate in today's discussion. We'd love to hear your questions and comments as we go through. So Carmel and MYAN asked Deloitte to have a look at the experience of young migrants in the labour market over the COVID period. It's an area that's there's some good information about the experience of migrants as a whole. There's good information on the labour market, but that kind of intersection of recent experience of young migrants, particularly through this very challenging economic period or economic and social period we've been going through under COVID, is perhaps not that well represented. So we are very happy to help with that and have collated some, I think, hopefully useful information in the report about that experience, and also about the benefits that could be gained from increasing economic participation of this cohort over time. I'll take you through some of the highlights of the report. As Carmel mentioned, you'll be sent a link to this later to go through. The analysis really focuses on the disruption that we saw last year through 2020 and up to early 2021 in framing this report. Of course, as we know, things have turned again this year. We've got a very significant proportion of the country under heavy restrictions at the moment, and that's been the case for much of the past 6 weeks or so. And really, we're almost going through a repeat in terms of experience, difficulties and labour market experience that we went through last year. So some of the information that we talked to here is actually becoming very relevant. Again, we've had across our broader economy something of a rebound from the COVID experience last year, with assistance from government and supporting that, and gradually the baton passing on to the private sector. But it's fair to say that that's kind of on pause again as we go under heavy restrictions, and I think we're aware the next couple of months at least will still be quite difficult until we can get up to those vaccination targets. So important, I think timely to release this report and to look at the labour market experience of young people, and particularly young migrants, and timely because we know that under the types of restrictions that we're seeing at the moment, that it is often younger people that are bearing the brunt of those restrictions, because it's more focused on service industries. Retail, hospitality, events, arts and entertainment are sectors that are more heavily restricted at the moment, and they're sectors that tend to employ young people, and including young migrants. And we also know that when there are difficulties in businesses, often it can be a last in, first out policy for businesses and organisations, and again, unfortunately, that can often target younger people who have perhaps less experience with the organisation, and hence that brings their concerns that Carmel's alluded to of some of the having a poor labour market entry can make it more difficult later on to fully engage, and brings about what we might call labour market scarring, where people have not fully participated in the labour market can be discouraged from doing so later in life. And that's a terrible social and personal outcome, but it's also, from an economy point of view, an enormous waste of economic potential where that occurs. So if we go into the findings of the report onto the next slide, I mean, I have to say that Australia, a feature of Australia has been a very successful migration program over the past several decades. Now, under COVID and with closed international borders, that is largely being paused, and we can see that has significant consequence across a range of dimensions. As for the country as a whole, we have much slower population growth than we did when international borders were open, because around half of our population growth comes from net migration. So we may end up with around 750,000 people fewer in Australia because of a period of 2 years of closed borders than we otherwise would have had. But the hallmark of a hallmark of Australia's migration program, of its success, is not just the fact that we've become a bigger country over time. It's because we've become a more prosperous country over time. So the real measure is the lift in per capita living standards, the improvement in the economic and social fabric of the country that a larger and more diverse population can bring. And that's really part of the risk as well that we're seeing at the moment, by having a much smaller inflow of people into Australia, that we not only have a smaller population that we might have otherwise had, but we have a less prosperous and less socially diverse country. Now, economic participation of young migrants does vary by visa stream. So part of today's focus is on humanitarian or refugee migrants. We are, and MYAN is also interested in other visa streams as well. So the significant number of people who come under a family visa, and then also various skilled visa streams. And as one might expect, you're looking at labour market interaction, participation rate, unemployment rate. Those measures tend to be better for people who come to Australia on skilled visas, broadly, which are often better than the experience for Australian-born citizens, and then can become less good through the family streams and humanitarian streams. And the gap between that labour force participation, if we look on the chart for humanitarian versus, say, born in Australia, that gap is really a measure of untapped potential for our economy. And there's a variety of reasons why it may occur, and that could include not fully utilising the skills and experience that migrants bring with them for many reasons. That may include difficulties in recognising overseas qualifications. It may include lack of knowledge about the Australian business community and economic opportunities are available, lack of mentoring, coaching in order to take advantage of those opportunities. Whatever the reason, we do observe that for some cohorts of young migrants, there is generally, and not just under COVID, generally more difficulty in full economic participation. It is something that is not so prevalent the longer that migrants are in Australia. We know that migration is a great success story for Australia, and so the longer the time since migration, the better those measures become, and the greater the measured economic contribution of migrants. But through initial years, and particularly for younger migrants, there can be difficulties. And there's certainly been the potential, if we move to the next slide, for those difficulties to be compounded under the COVID environment, where we had last year significant job losses, and we're starting to see that again. I would think in the last 6 to 8 weeks with extensive lockdowns, it's really exacerbated some of the labour market challenges that young migrants face. So the observation was that, yes, we saw the worst part of the recession last year was around June, mid-year, and we saw a drop-off in employment generally, but we saw a bigger drop-off in employment for those who had been born overseas. And at the same time, we saw a rise in unemployment generally through last year, but we saw a bigger rise for those that have been born overseas. So such that by the end of the year, employment was 8% lower for young people born overseas, but only 1% lower for those born in Australia. Now, early 2021 continued the recovery. So for all cohorts, the situation was getting better. And you can see even on the chart on the right that the unemployment measure for born overseas had come back to, towards that for Australian born. So this is, we're not necessarily pointing to a you know, a higher permanent challenge in terms of unemployment. But it is evidence that there's been a period where the challenge has been more significant, and periods of unemployment can do significant damage to people's future potential. Unfortunately, you know, one of the predictors of unemployment is whether people have been unemployed before. So the more likely or more often that you've been unemployed, it can be a predictor for future unemployment and for lower earnings going forward. So you know, all periods of employment or otherwise interaction with the labour market are important. Now, as I noted earlier, you know, the youth cohort was harder hit by the downturn with COVID. I mean, here we're focusing on those aged 15 to 34 as that's the way the data is cut. And that is primarily because of the sectors that were most heavily restricted: retail, hospitality, arts, events, entertainment. The recovery was seen in many of those sectors by early 2021, but there is that potential for labour market scarring. If we just move to the next slide, it's kind of a whirlwind look through the report, but the other element we looked at is, as well as profiling some of the challenges that young migrants have faced, particularly through the COVID period, pardon me, is looking at essentially a counterfactual presentation. Well, what if a range of policies, measures, practices were introduced which encouraged higher labour force participation from those aged 15 to 29 that were born overseas? What kind of benefit could that bring to the economy overall? And here we're talking about a range of things like, you know, increasing English proficiency after arrival, you know, deeper, perhaps more appropriate recognition of overseas qualifications where appropriate, you know, business activities, coaching, mentoring, better navigation of education and training pathways, better understanding of the Australian business environment, a range of measures that lift the average participation of young migrants to what is seen for those that are born in Australia on average. Something that we tend to get to by you know, the longer the migrants stay, something that we tend to get to by the second generation of migrants. But this is fast tracking it to saying, well, you know, we'll get there sooner. And you know, it can be significant from an economic point of view. I mean, as well as having a you know, a social imperatives so that everyone, you know, can contribute to their potential. You know, in terms of overall economic lift, there's significant potential here to add to the labour force by having greater participation from this cohort, and doing that actually then generates some further second round benefits through the economy as well. So the modelled gain was in the order of, you know, 54,000 full-time jobs on average over the course of the next decade. You know, if you change practices that led to that sort of policy. So it's, you know, it's significant. It kind of highlights, you know, there's a challenge there, there's an opportunity. But many of those gains are realised over time with length of time in Australia, but this looks to fast track that outcome. And just finally, it's also, of course, very relevant in the context that we're going to face over the next year as we open our international borders, of who's going to get priority to come into Australia. So clearly, you know, we've heard a lot about, you know, Australians stranded overseas, and it's really heart-wrenching. And clearly, you know, repatriating citizens is going to be important. But there's, you know, a long list of other people who are looking to get to Australia as well, be that business migrants, family reunion, refugees. You know, Carmel mentioned Afghanistan. You know, how is Australia going to prioritise that intake over time is going to be an important policy question, and it's important that migrants are not left out of that prioritisation as well, given the contribution that new migrants have made to Australia and can continue to make particularly with the types of supports that can lift economic participation over time. Carmel, I will leave it there. Hopefully that's maybe stimulated some questions and support for discussion as we go on.
Great, thank you. I know, David, you could have gone on for a lot longer. There's a whole lot of other data analysis and deep diving that hasn't been done before. So we're really looking forward to sharing that with you. And I think the huge takeaway for me from that was this untapped potential that we have and the economic cost generally to the Australian community if we don't do something about it. So thank you very much for sharing just a little bit of what's in that report. I now want to go to the official part of today, which is to welcome Alison Larkins, the Commonwealth Coordinator General for Migrant Services, who's been in that role since 2019. For many of us who work in the migration settlement area, Alison will be well known to you. She has extensive experience across a range of social policy portfolios at the Commonwealth level, and now is leading really the Commonwealth government and working with industry in the sector to look at driving settlement outcomes for our migrants and refugees. So Alison, can I hand over to you to officially launch the report?
Thank you, Carmel. And can I just start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which I am speaking to you today, the Ngunnawal people. It's a glorious day here, even though we're all inside. David, so good to hear all of that, and thank you so much for the report. It's as you said, I think it's a challenging area in which to work because we don't have as much data as would be helpful to help us navigate and develop good policy responses, and this is a great contribution. Can I also thank Carmel and the rest of the MYAN team for your ongoing efforts in supporting young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds. It's a great pleasure for me to be joining you all here today to launch this latest report. So for all young people, we know that work is an important enabler of independence, a way to take on greater adult responsibilities and a rite of passage, which fosters for people a sense of purpose and achievement. And for young refugees and migrants in particular, work is also critical to integration and forming a sense of belonging to Australia and being an Australian. It helps young refugees and migrants establish local connections, gain skills, improve their English skills, and build social capital. And as the report highlights, while the past year and a half has been a difficult time for many young people, migrant youth are facing a greater uphill battle when it comes to employment. And we also know that young migrants and refugees are resilient, eager to work, and are highly motivated by the benefits further education and training can have on their employability and future careers. Before the lockdown in early May, I was lucky enough to visit the regional town of Armidale in New South Wales, and it's home to many Yazidi refugees. The Yazidi are an ethnic minority group from northern Iraq and parts of Syria and Turkey, and around 600 refugees from an Yazidi background had made their home in Armidale since February 2018. It was a pleasure to meet some of these refugees and hear about how they're currently thriving in Armidale. So many people had already secured employment, and I was really struck by the high aspirations of the community, and particularly of the young people I met. I met many young Yazidis who've been working in the agricultural industry, some who've been working with the Rotary Club of Armidale and local farmers to set up their own agricultural-based businesses. There were people who had great aspiration for careers in pharmacy, being as pharmacists or working in medicine, and they were very focused on learning English and ensuring that they had the skills to allow them to do further study. Others had decided that they wanted to get to work and have more responsibility straight away and were focused on building an employment history in Australia, and they argued that working was a great way to improve their English. Those conversations really highlighted to me that access to and experience of meaningful economic participation is just a critical part of a young refugee, of someone from a refugee background or a migrant background towards integration and broader success in Australia. I've also been really encouraged over the past year by the work I see social enterprises doing to create employment pathways for young refugees and migrants. Miss MISA events in South Australia is one such social enterprise. They offer boutique event styling and catering for weddings, corporate events and functions. And since 2017, they've helped launch the careers of over 100 refugee young people in South Australia, giving many their first paid job. 100% of all the profits of Miss MISA are reinvested back into on and off the job training and ongoing employment support for refugee youth. Last year, I worked with the Refugee and Migrant Services Advisory Council on the creation of an employment guide for businesses looking to hire migrants, and specifically those from a refugee background. Profiled in that guide is an organisation called Career Seekers, which helps match university students of refugee background with employers aligned with their skills and aspirations. Students are offered a 12-week internship working with large Australian companies and are supported by career seekers throughout this time. Internships like these help students learn the local work and industry culture and develop professional networks. So this report that I'm launching today is one that shines a light on a significant challenge. It's a challenge that government is taking seriously, and one I'm particularly interested in given my mandate, which is to lead work to improve employment, English language acquisition and community integration for refugees, humanitarian entrants and other migrants. But governments can't do this alone. It won't be a surprise to any of you on the call that it's a challenge we all need to be tackling together. So it's inspiring to be here today, surrounded, although virtually, by so many people who are focused on helping our young people thrive. I'd like to particularly recognise the Migration Council of Australia and Ines Willicks, Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group, for their leadership in supporting better outcomes for young people. And again, let me thank Carmel and MYAN for inviting me to speak here today and for the work in producing this critical report, which is helping us to better understand the challenges young migrants and refugees face in the labour market and how we can collectively respond to the challenges and empower these young people to pursue their aspirations and enjoy a full life in Australia, as well as getting an important economic benefit. Thank you all for listening, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other speakers, particularly from today's youth ambassadors. So thank you so much, Carmel.
Thank you, Alison, for that overview. And I know from listening to you and from our experience that you are listening, and that this report goes some way to giving us some of the evidence and data that we need to demonstrate that we need to invest in young people. So thank you very much. And can I just remind everybody, there's a couple of questions in the Q&A, but if I could ask you to keep putting them in there, and I'm now going to hand over to Matika for the next part.
Great, thanks David and Alison. So as mentioned earlier, we've got Fatima and Yusuf here, just to give you a little bit more detail about their sort of experience and what they're coming along with. Fatima, again, I'll just reiterate, is MYAN State Ambassador in Adelaide, South Australia. She's been heavily involved in the community work, and she's achieved a number of great things, just one of them being participating in Youth Parliament. And she is currently employed in the finance industry, but would like to hopefully change over to the IT industry soon. Yusuf, on the other hand, is a young entrepreneur from Melbourne. He's found it quite difficult to find work for a number of reasons, which is what led him to sort of deferring from his studies and just rather focus on gaining employment. Amongst all that, he started his own business called VIP Men's Grooming. So thank you both for joining us today. It would be really interesting to sort of hear your perspectives and your experiences. Obviously, this is what the report has sort of come out of and what we'd really like to focus on. Fatima, I might start with you and just ask you what your experience has sort of been with employment, and if there was a difference before COVID and during COVID as well.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for having me. I'm coming from Ghana land. I'm here in Adelaide. So before COVID hit, I think a lot of people can relate to this. I guess in terms of hours, you had more hours with work. So previously before this, I was working in telecom sales. So luckily in Adelaide, we don't have as much lockdown compared to other states, and I can't even emphasize with the other states because I don't know how it really feels to go through multiple lockdowns at once. But when lockdown did hit Adelaide, we were at like the minimum hours, and even then I wasn't like eligible for Centrelink. So it was just me trying to like, you know, make scraps of what I get paid in terms of minimum work, because the company didn't reapply for, I think, job seeker or job keeper, either one. So yeah.
Yeah, great. And I think based on previous discussions as well, you're sort of mentioning that you like to travel a lot and potentially working interstate and things like that. Has that sort of affected you now?
It really did. So I am hoping to get into that industry, as Martika mentioned. In Adelaide, there's not a lot of opportunities for that. So I was looking at like applying jobs interstate, and that kind of put that, I wouldn't say dream, but I guess like just a different pathway for me, put on hold. It's been almost 2 years now, literally almost 2 years now, just with COVID. And like for me anyway, there's no point of me traveling interstate or like moving interstate, leaving everything behind. And then there's that instability like still at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Fatima. And Yusuf, just quickly as well with you, obviously you're an entrepreneur with your business. Can you tell us how that sort of came about and the reason why you sort of started that?
So the main reason why I started my own store was I could see that there wasn't any potential in finding work. So I said, why not find my own potential and create something that could actually help me out. So instead of spending my Centrelink money on food and wasting it, I said self-investment, and that's basically the reason why I started a store. But the reason why specifically I started VIP Men's Grooming was as I'm getting older, I started to realize that looking presentable is a key part in doing well in society. So this is where my phrase comes from, feel your wealth, because I heard when you look good, you feel good. And then when you feel good, you do good in society.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good to hear. And it'll be interesting to hear about the sort of challenges you've faced and if there was a difference with COVID coming along as well. But just in terms overall, in terms of the barriers that you've faced in finding work, what has that been like? The report obviously touched on, you know, young migrants having a lack of social networks, not really employers not recognizing their skills and qualifications they already have, and sort of not knowing how to navigate the employment system either and how to apply for jobs and things like that, as well as racial discrimination. So are they things that you can relate to, or what are some other barriers that you've faced in finding work?
So the biggest challenge I faced when trying to find work was, what do you call it? Not understanding how the actual workforce works. So one of my friends had told me about a program, which was CMY. Basically, it actually teaches young people how to polish up your resume, how to do certain things, which will actually lead you to find work. So because of this, I've actually like been more successful in finding work. And also another challenge would be lack of networking.
Yeah, so it's because of that one sort of social network that you had that led you into this training pathway where you were able to get that employment, and you successfully achieved getting a job out of that program. But you told me that COVID sort of hit just as you were employed. What from there?
So as soon as my luck was turning around, like 2 weeks into it, out of nowhere, another snap lockdown happens. I'm like, oh damn! Now my position is, you know, on the position of being let go. So yeah, that's been a challenge as well.
And that was in the entertainment industry, sorry?
Yep, so events and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so was there a decrease in hours because of that as well?
Not just decrease in hours, not even have any hours at all. So
yeah. Thank you for sharing, Yusuf. In terms of Fatima, I might get you to start off with this one, but what was a sort of turning point for you in finding a job and getting some secure employment?
I think mainly for me, it was like at the moment with my finance job, it's pretty much the same as Yusuf. Like I bounced off the start, like I got my job through networks. So it was a friend that suggested, you know, like they've got a hiring position if I was interested. So I thought I might as well give it a go because at that time I was looking for work. And this is, I feel like a lot of young people can relate to this, or not even young people, but like even if you have a degree, so let's say, because I finished IT, but because I have no experience, it was so hard for me to find jobs. Like I've applied over 200 jobs in like the space of 2 months. And I would get interviews, but it's always like, you're really good, but you have no experience. But then it's always that cycle of how am I supposed to get experience when no one's even like wanting to hire me from the first place? So yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely something we hear a lot. And a lot of young migrants, I think, yeah, that you're right, there is a cycle of applying for jobs but not having enough experience, but where do you get the experience from? And I think, like Yusuf touched on earlier, those training pathways would be really essential in sort of getting that employment earlier rather than later. Yusuf, what about you? What was a turning point for you in finding a job?
Just having a positive outlook in the work environment, because like Fatima said, when you apply for hundreds of jobs and you're continuously getting rejected emails, that kind of deters your confidence. So another thing that kept me pushing was just having the right people, because it just, like a person once told me, it doesn't matter what you know, it's who you know. So if you know the right person, you're basically in it to win it.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from both of you is really that networking that's really important into getting these jobs, whether it be a friend or a training pathway or opportunity or program. Yeah, that seems to be the way people are sort of securing these jobs, but there's not enough of it at the moment from what I'm hearing from both of you. But yeah, do you think, one last question, do you think there's any other ways young migrants could be supported in sort of reaching their goals, whether it's related to education or employment?
I would say having more awareness of like traineeships. That's one way you could secure a job, and basically having an outlet or program that you can join where you can build networks, I would say. Yeah,
great. What about you, Fatima? Any thoughts on that?
I think mainly this would be for, I would say, companies, organizations. I feel like there's not enough representation of, like, I would say, people of color or typical communities in, like, let's say, you know how, I don't know if it's a thing, but in uni when they put out like posters, you see all like different backgrounds and stuff, but then when you go apply for jobs and you go to the website, like you don't really see much of like diversity in there, because I had an experience where it did deter me to apply for a certain company because I felt like maybe if I did go in, like they wouldn't even look at me just because I'm, you know, quite different to what most of the people that were working there. Most of the jobs that I had were very heavily like Australian-born, Caucasian, like workmates. So I don't know, sometimes it's very important to have that, like, just welcoming environment as well. So yeah, I think just mainly representation.
Yeah, that's really great and really important to get your insights into that, and something practical that perhaps service providers or employers can take away from this conversation. So thank you both for sharing your experiences, and we'll come back to you during the Q&A as well. So for anyone that has any questions for Fatima and Yusuf, please in the chat. Otherwise, Carmel, hand over back to you again. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Martika. Thank you, Fatima and Yusuf, for providing some case study examples of what it's like to be young and migrant in Australia and struggling. And for Yusuf, if anybody wants to know more about his story, SBS did a great expose of what it's like to be a young person entrepreneur trying to get a job in Melbourne during COVID. So we'll put that link into the Q&A as well. It was part of the small business secrets show on SBS. So thank you again, Yusuf and Fatima, for both agreeing to speak. I know it's not easy to speak on these things to such a live audience when there's 200 people listening. So thank you very much. Okay. To Innes Willox, who'll be known to some of you. You'll see him on TV if you don't know him. As a representative of industry, and he also chairs the Migration Council of Australia, so he understands these issues at both an employer and migration area. So thank you, Innes, for joining us today. And maybe the first question would be, from where you sit, what are your thoughts about what the report's telling us about employment for this group of young people?
Hi, Carmel, and hi to everyone. Hope you're all well today, wherever you may be, locked in or locked out or locked down. I hope you're all okay and looking after yourselves and your families. But want to start by thanking Carmel and David for putting this report together, for Alison for launching it, and for Yusuf and Fatima for those fantastic sort of insights into the real lived experience that thousands of people have every day. So don't think you're on your own here. There's a lot of people in these sort of situations, no matter their background, struggling at the moment to find work. Somebody through this conversation, I can't remember, might have been Alison, referred to purpose and work being a key to helping people find purpose, and that's something I strongly believe. And we're in a very unusual economic situation at the moment. We're going through COVID, which is putting a lot of restrictions on what business can and can't do. A lot of areas where the young migrant community in particular would get a start have been shut down or blocked off from them at the moment. You know, think of hospitality, events, security, all those sort of parts of the economy, the national economy, where people do get a foot in and a leg up, are closed off at the moment, which is particularly troublesome. The report itself that's been put together by Deloitte is actually fantastic, because it's actually a really good sort of bringing together of a lot of the issues we're facing at a macro level, at a national level. So David said we're about 750,000 people down. We would agree with that, maybe a little bit more even, when you take into account lack of temporary migration, permanent migration, skilled migration, refugees, as mentioned, students, tourists, all of those go into making our economy work and function. So we are well down in the terms of the size of the economy. So they're going to present some real challenges now. We've got what's called a tight labour market at the moment. Unemployment is low, historically low. It's got a 4 in front of it. That's very unusual for now. That's telling us a couple of things. And employers are telling us this too, that they are finding a lot of difficulty filling jobs, but particular jobs, jobs with some skills. And I won't go into what the skills are, but we have a skills base they're finding very hard to fill at the moment. And it's not unusual for me to have members of mine with hundreds of unfilled jobs. If they're big companies, hundreds of unfilled jobs at the moment. And even smaller ones are finding it difficult. Then you've got the sort of perverse things going on around the economy with incentives that governments are giving people to keep them afloat, to keep them alive, basically. And this is preventing a lot of people from applying for work too. You're getting money for not doing much in some cases. And so that's adding to the problems that employers are finding at the moment. So our economy is changing shape. I think it was Yusuf who made the point around it's not what you know, it's who you know. That's to a large extent right, because who you know gives you the leg in and the opening that you might need, but you've still got to have the skills to develop the skills. And where are the skills gaps emerging at the moment? Well, they're always obviously around IT. I mean, if you've got any sort of IT background or capability, you are going to be in demand. Our economy is moving very much down that track where IT, data collection, robotics, digital capacity, all of those are going to be crucial. So the best estimate we can give you is about 70% of the jobs of the future, the jobs of now and of the future, are going to have some sort of digital requirement as a part of them. And that doesn't mean that you've got to be a coder or know everything about digitalisation and technology, but you have to have the smarts to get around working on computers, knowing what a spreadsheet is and how all that works. So that's sort of where the big skills gaps are at the moment. The big thing out of this, though, too, Carmel, is that migrants, no matter what their shape or form or background, they're risk takers. And that was Yusuf's story was such a fantastic one. They're risk takers to make the jump, the leap of faith, to come to a new country, to start again, which every migrant does, start again and try to create a better life for themselves and their families. To do that is a huge risk. And that's something that businesses really appreciate and understand, is risk-taking, because businesses themselves are taking risk every day, no matter their size, whether it's BHP in Australia or Telstra or any other business, there's always risks being taken. So that is a huge point of a plus point for migrants who come into the country. So what this report did when I read it was sort of pull all these strands together, tell us that yes, we have a very sort of strange labour market at the moment, a very strange employment market at the moment. COVID will not be with us forever and opportunities will come back. The challenge, I think, out of this is to try to work through individually how you can be best placed for when things do get back to normal, whether that's late this year, next year or the year after. Nobody knows, but how do you use this time wisely to create the best opportunity for yourself to get into the labour market in a meaningful way? I thought it was a fantastic report.
Great, thanks, Ines. So maybe one more question that is kind of emerging through the questions as well is, can you take us through, I mean, I think the term that David used earlier was that there's, untapped potential. We're talking up to 50,000 jobs per year of under 30s not getting access to economic security. What's your thinking about what the role of industry is to support this group of young people? We've seen some of the investments from, government either go to the employer or to the person that's unemployed. I'm just wondering whether there's a view in hearing all this and about the view that these young people aren't just going to get jobs. You've heard from Farah and Yusuf, like when they're competing, they're not going to get it, but yet they offer skills, resilience, and everything else you said. What's your view on the role of industry in this kind of situation we're in at the moment?
It's a really good question, and I think COVID, Carmel, is changing industry mindsets. Not every job, but a lot of jobs have fundamentally changed, and so geographic location is less important in many cases than it used to be. So what you've got is sort of what we call a white collar and a blue collar scenario going on. The white collars, people, like me, wearing a shirt, we're able to work from home. But blue collar, you think of everyone in factories, driving trucks, doing deliveries, all those sort of things. They're continuing to turn up to a workplace every day. But geography is sort of becoming less important, and that's why you see more people sort of working remotely, working away from home. So there's opportunity working at home away from an office. Offices are sort of, they might come back, but they're going to come back in a very different way. So all of this is forcing employers to rethink how they employ, who they employ, and under the circumstances under which they employ. Now, there's a huge role for industry here. As I mentioned, I think we all agree, I said it before, migrants are risk takers. And businesses, once they go down the path of engaging migrants, particularly young migrants, get an enormous amount out of it themselves, get an enormous amount out of it in terms of their sense of contribution to the community, but also being able to engage with different communities as well. as you go into regional areas, like country areas of Australia, you're seeing more and more of an appetite. And Alison mentioned some examples in her presentation around engaging with migrant communities. We're seeing more and more of that in regional centres. That's very important. But there is a role for business. And quite frankly, I'll be upfront, I'm a business representative. Business hasn't done enough in this space. I think everyone recognises that there's more to do, more contribution to make, more to get out of it. And it's conversations, though, businesses are having all the time. The big point I'd make is that when this ends, we are going to get a huge influx of migrants. Again, we are a migrant nation, and that will happen again. It'll be a bit different to what it was before, probably not in the student numbers we had before or makeup, but we're still going to get huge migrants. We've got enormous, as I mentioned, skill shortages, job shortages at the moment. So there are going to be opportunities, and businesses are going to have to change their focus, because there'll be a big hunt on for those skills as soon as we do re-emerge into a new economy. So, yeah.
Great, thank you for that, Ines. I think we're going to bring everybody together now from the panel, and there's a number of questions in the chat. So before I hand over to Matika, I think the first question we might see if we can get on, which is a research data one, David, and then there's a whole lot of others about what the report says. Can you just talk through how you collected the data and if there was any systemic issues you picked up in the data collection? A couple of people have asked.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Carmel. So look, the data is really a collection from different sources coming together. So we've, in terms of the COVID experience, we have tapped into the Bureau of Statistics, some of their detailed labour force data. We've tapped into some of the longer period data is from the census, with the census that links, well, the census that we all kind of filled out last week, the previous version of that's linked to a migration data set. So has further details on migrants linked to that census information. And then we've used some of our own modelling for that kind of scenario analysis. It's still not perfect. So we don't have like a perfect tracker of 15 to 29-year-olds from migrant backgrounds, or split by visa category that people came to Australia on, and their kind of labour market experience over time. But it's bringing those various sets together, as well as, of course, the surveys that are conducted by Department of Home Affairs, so the Build a New Life in Australia survey. So there's a few different sources. I think it gives us a reasonable picture, but more information is always better.
Great, thanks, David. I think Matika's going to take you through a few questions for the panel now.
Yeah, great. There seems to be a few questions coming through about the connection between education and employment. So if anyone could speak to the sorts of strategies that perhaps institutions or employers could use to keep young people from migrant and refugee backgrounds connected to education and employment opportunities, what do you think that would look like? I might open it up. Yeah, David, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's various ways to get into the labour force, and great discussion with Yusuf and Fatima earlier around that. So formal education can be one entry stream, but often it is that kind of networking connection which is important. I mean, one of the many tragedies of the disruptions from COVID is it's not only stopped the formal kind of working relationship in many cases, it's stopped, or it's made more difficult some of the informal connections that are important in developing kind of entry into the labour market as well, and that even includes like volunteering experience. So it can be important to build. If people are finding that their preferred method isn't quite working, or just for their own benefit or to gain experience with an employer, volunteering can be invaluable. Unfortunately, some of those opportunities have been a bit more limited as well, but we will be getting through this. That there is, we do know that there's a vaccination target. We're moving slowly towards that, but pretty soon we'll be moving rapidly towards that. So those kind of opportunities will open up again. And I think, you know, in terms of business, you know, I think it's important for business and organisations to look at not only direct entry into the organisation, but opportunities for work experience, internships, or even volunteering opportunities for kind of the next cohort going through, or even the cohort that's had difficulties over this past 18 months.
Yeah. Fatima and Yusuf, I'll be interested to hear what your experience has been like with education and then your field of employment. Is it what you had studied? Is it related to what you had studied, or is it completely different? How is that looking for you?
For me, so when I finished year 12, I went and did psychology. But then halfway through, I kind of realised it was taking too long. So even if I finished uni, I'd have to do all of the other stuff to even get into like a psychology environment, I guess, in terms of work. So I decided to do media. I did that. And then it was really, just because of COVID around that time, that didn't really work for me. And then now I'm working in finance, which is so different from like all my other jobs. And because I've studied IT as well, like I finished IT last year. Yeah, like I said earlier, it was quite hard for me to get into the industry, even though there is heaps of jobs online, like advertised. It's just that I have no experience. So yeah.
Yeah. Yusuf, how about you? What has your experience been like between studying and employment?
So just before, I was studying a diploma of business, and I had to drop that real quick because of the pandemic. So I would say in year 12, there wasn't much like lessons where we could actually use to like, there wasn't any educations on how to maneuver in workforces, or how to, like, there wasn't any tips or tricks to do anything like that, which because of that, I would say there's also another like hindrance in young people finding work, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Yusuf.
No problem.
I can see you've got your hand up. Would you like to comment?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to reflect on when you actually look at the data of who is receiving job seekers, so, and who is in the job active, who are currently clients of job active. If you look at refugees, you can see that people of refugee background, you can see that the majority of people have poor English or lower levels of schooling. So it's really clear that the better your qualification, the more education you have, the better English you have, the more likely it is that you will get employment. If you just look at who's ending up on the job active caseload, I think language is clearly a really big barrier, and one of the shifts I think we need to make is to look at how we can reduce some of that language barrier. We know that for people coming from some language backgrounds, learning English is a 2 to 3 year job to get to sort of functional English. It's not an easy thing for people. People don't just do it in 6 months. So we've seen some really good some businesses starting to go, well, I don't actually need to have all of my workforce speaking in English. I can actually have a multilingual workforce as long as I've got some bicultural workers who can make sure messages are understood, and that I can create a safe workplace. We've got a fantastic abattoir in Melbourne that is really providing a first step for people, training them, but not requiring English language at the start. So they're doing English training alongside. But I think if businesses could become a bit more flexible around use of language, there's a workforce there that's very motivated, and that can also accelerate people's language learning.
Yusuf, would you like to state something here as well?
Yeah, I just So another thing that I've noticed is in TAFE, I did VCE, but I mean not in TAFE, in VCal and VET, they used to do employment. So there would be a week where they just go off to a company where they do some form of like either volunteer or like some form of work, which like Fatima said, they need experience. So things like that could be helping youth, build their what would you call it? Resume, I guess. Yeah.
Build up their experience. Yeah. Yeah, that's, I think, a few really good points as well. So what I'm hearing is, getting those early opportunities as early as high school, and then as well as from Alison, being able to have that multilingual workforce is really important too, so that we're not sort of cornering people into only speaking English, but usually they can speak a few different languages, and we can really utilize that in our space. Ines, would you like to contribute here too?
Yeah, thanks for that. All I wanted to say and to add was that this is something that business is looking at more and more with our schools, our TAFEs, our vocational education training, universities, to get more people into what is called work integrated learning, to spend time at work, at a workplace as part of their education. And it's something that business is wanting more of, wanting universities and others and TAFEs and others to do much more of, so that people do get, as Yusuf talked about, that workplace experience, some time in work to understand what a workplace is at and is like. So I think you're going to see more of that in the time ahead as universities and other education places sort of pivot to sort of get closer to work, because getting people into work is one of the big outcomes of education, right? So there'll be more of it.
Great, thank you for that, and thank you for all your contributions to that question. Just moving along to the next one, Carmel, this might be directed more towards you, but how can we better recognise and promote specific skills and capacities that migrant youth can bring to the workforce?
Wow, I didn't realise I was going to be asked questions. Thank you, Matika. I think that part of MYAN running this kind of activity today and bringing young people, government, industry and researchers together is part of the beginning of that conversation, that we need to start reframing this narrative that this group of young people don't have skills and are unemployable, which I think is part of the narrative that is going on. And I think, Alison, your point was valid about reconceptualising work. I think what Ines has said about changing the educational pathway to employment has to change. I think there has to be a rethink about this. And I think that us getting Deloitte to do this report, and I need to kind of publicly thank David and his team who did a substantial piece of work for us, something that NGOs like MYAN normally can't afford to do because we need to get the data to demonstrate this issue. I think we have to have this data to show that they are an untapped potential. I think that's the big challenge for all of us, is to then reframe the way that young people transition from school to work has to be different as well. Jobs are different. So I think we just have to start to see these young people, as we've seen from Yusuf and Fatima today, that there are thousands and thousands of young people there who want to work, who just don't know how to get into the workforce.
Thanks, Carmel, and thank you for being able to respond so greatly, even though you didn't know I would be asking you. David, this might be something for you, but is there much data on labour market scarring, particularly the impact on the migrant and new and emerging communities?
Yeah, in relation to new migrants, I'm not sure there's been a lot of studies on new migrants specifically, but in terms of labour market scarring, that terminology, that is quite well established, that the experience that the longer that people are out of the labour market, it diminishes their future chances of employment, it diminishes future chances of higher earnings unless there's active intervention. I think that is quite well understood, and I think we see across the federal and state governments quite a significant effort focused on sort of long-term disadvantaged job seekers to get people engaged with and back in the labour market. And you know, it can take you know, quite significant intervention to support some cohorts in that respect. I mean, better policies, of course, prevention. So the kind of things we're talking about today is, you know, allowing people to have a smoother path before you kind of get trapped into long-term unemployment, and in which time it becomes, you know, more difficult and more costly, as it were, for government to support. So, you know, the downside, the cost of having people disengage and having labour market scarring, I think, are quite established. What's probably not, you know, which is open, what's open to debate is the discussion we're having now of the best way of avoiding that.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Alison, I can see you've got your hand up, and this might be a question for you too within from the same audience member, but what more do you think that the government at all levels, including local governments, could do to support unemployment challenges?
And I just talk about the data first, and then I'll go to that second question. So one of the pieces of work that I have been doing is trying to get a better set of data to enable us to look at how effective our settlement and integration strategies are. And as part of that, we are really trying to build a better set of data around employment outcomes for refugees and humanitarian entrants, starting there. At the moment, we rely heavily on census data, which only comes every 5 years, and which means it's very hard to actually monitor what's happening for a cohort of people as they come in. So we're really wanting to move to be able to look at employment outcomes for cohorts of people as they migrate, so we are understanding what's happening in closer to real time. So that work will progressively roll out over the next couple of years. So in terms of what I think government can do, there's certainly work going on at the moment on employment and how we can lift employment outcomes. We've invested quite a lot of effort into reform of the adult migrant English programs, because we know English is a major barrier. We're also looking at how we can support more direct employment opportunities for people of refugee background. So really helping to support social enterprise to do that. Going to the networks barrier that Yusuf's talked about in particular, I think we are also exploring how we can better engage the broader community in the settlement of refugees and humanitarian entrants through community sponsorship programs. And what we find when we look at community sponsorship pathways in Canada, the employment outcomes are better for people who come in through a community sponsorship stream. And the theory is that that's because they come in and they have an established network in a host community, and that network can help them in their process of entering the labour market. So I think there's lots more that government can and is doing to support to address this.
Great. Carmel, I noticed you're unmuted. Did you have something to pop in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, for Alison and maybe all the panel members, there's been a couple of questions about the understanding that the English is an issue for the refugee cohort, but some of what we tried to get out of the report from Deloitte was the Australian-born of multicultural backgrounds who English is not a barrier, and the figures are not much better. So my question is, and there's a couple of questions in the chat about what's at play there. Is racism an issue? Is it blindness of employers? I think Yusuf and Fatima have both talked about maybe not going into the right careers. There's not pathways. I'm wondering whether anybody, whether it's government, David, Ines, or the young people, want to kind of comment on that issue.
Yeah, Carmel, look, thanks for that. I think, yeah, look, there's lots of barriers, and English language can be one. Although, as you know, as Ines and others have noted, there's employers doing innovative things to overcome that. But as a business community, English is very important. I mean, beyond that, yes, there are other barriers, but there's success as well in that the longer that migrants are in Australia, and particularly once you get to second generation, then outcomes do improve. And I think that's part of the overall narrative here, that this we're looking at migration program is a success story for Australia, but there's elements of the experience, we're focusing on young migrants and particularly from through the humanitarian stream that find that very difficult at first. What differentiates good outcomes from poorer ones? Yes, having employment or having a focus on meaningful employment is really important, but also having that kind of community support and other supports around as people come to Australia are important as well. The job in itself, often, and I think we've seen it where the intervention or the focus is just around the job, then often that's not sustaining and people move on to different areas. But if you've got the successful ingredients of both an employment offer plus a supportive community, then you can success for those cohorts can come quite quickly.
Can I just jump in, Carmel? English is a barrier. It's true, no doubt about that. But it's also not in every job, but in a lot of jobs, it's essential. It's crucial, and I'll give you a couple of reasons for that. One is the bottom line. A lot of businesses now have a heavy focus on safety and workplace safety, and English is a crucial part of that, to get messages out, to get messages understood, to communicate safety messages. So that's one point that's very important. Two, more and more businesses are looking for people to work together in teams, to have teams of people together working on different issues or projects or whatever. And of course, they've got to be able to communicate. So of course, English is a good part of that. And the third point is that where a lot of new jobs are emerging, not just in this area, but a lot of new jobs that are emerging because of the COVID economy, people at home, people working differently, is call centres. And that's where there's a lot of jobs starting to emerge in call centres. And of course, English is a crucial, perhaps the crucial component of that. So language is a barrier, but it's also important for a lot of businesses to have some certainty around English skill and proficiency. That said, in my day job and in my night job at the Australian Industry Group and at Migration Council, we've had a lot of discussions with government around the IELTS, English proficiency. Are they the right level? Does government expect too much in terms of English proficiency to migrate here and be able to contribute here? I think that's an ongoing discussion because it depends on exactly what the job is that's being sought or being looked for here. But look, we can't get away from it. English is a barrier for many, undoubtedly, and it takes time to overcome. But it's also not an essential part, but it's a very important part of doing business and operating in an Australian context.
So can I just add to that as well? Just because most of my jobs are heavily customer service based, and working with other people who are not who are born in Australia, we'd get customers come in, and when they go and serve them, it's like, I don't want to talk to you because you've got an accent. That even though they can speak English, but because of the accent they have, customers would rather speak to someone who doesn't have an outside Aussie accent, I guess. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And Fatima or Yusuf, from your experience, do you think there's any ways in going about how employers could be more inclusive when we're thinking about English proficiency, things like that? What do you think are some ways that it could be a bit more, that we could compromise a bit more, I guess? Or in general, what advice do you have for services to sort of raise awareness about employment and programs?
I'm not too sure, but I would say it depends on which field you're which field you're looking to be in. So you don't really need to speak when it comes to warehousing. So things like that, I'm not 100% sure of how to correctly answer that question.
I think for me, we're mainly heavily involving like businesses or like companies. So let's say because I know when I was in high school, you get that subject where you could get like, let's say if you've got police force to come in, like, you know, we can do that in sessions where we like businesses that would come in and do like information sessions. Or I know Community Corp in Adelaide, they do work with, I think recently it was with an IT company where they've invited the IT company to come in and speak to the young people. And so, you know, these are the other, like, these are different industries. Like within IT, you have all these stuff that you can get into. This and specifically just one like pathway. So yeah, like, you know, organizations can do that where they can invite, companies or business to come in.
Great. Were there any other thoughts on that, Alison or David? And then we'll have one final question before we wrap up, as I'm a little bit mindful of time now. Any thoughts on how employers or service can improve on raising awareness and employment pathways for young people?
I think, yeah, I already chimed in on that earlier, so probably nothing further from me, Martika.
Yeah, no worries. And just in terms of mentoring for everyone on the panel, what do you think, what sorts of mentoring, or can you explain the types of mentoring opportunities that could be provided and what this could look like? So from an employer's perspective, working in the industry, from Ines or Alison, David, and then any ideas you might have about how you could be better mentored for Yusuf and Fatima?
I'll go first, if you don't mind, Martika. I'll just say, I think, again, I come back to Yusuf. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So whatever opportunity you have to get out, to meet new people, to share your experiences, that's important. Secondly is through schools or through whatever education institution it is, encourage them to get industry to come in and to talk to you about what happens in their industry and their business, so that you get a better idea of what goes on there. I think that's incredibly important, and that's how you can pick up and meet people. And then find your own success stories, people who have cracked the job market, people who have, you know, done well and progressed up a career ladder or whatever, and just try to sit next to them and always be prepared to ask questions. There are a lot of people very happy to mentor from their own experience and to provide help and to give back and all those sort of things. I would just say, be prepared to be mentored. It's very important that you do ask questions. Never be afraid to ask what you might think are silly questions or dumb questions. They'll take you much further along a pathway than you think. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunities that you can create. You've just got to be brave to create them.
And just to add to that, it's going to be, I think, a really interesting environment in the next like 6 to 9 months once we get past these lockdowns and restrictions and start to open up. But between that period and when we open our international borders, Ines mentioned earlier, you know, some companies have hundreds of jobs available. Businesses, I think, are going to be very open to different ways of engaging with people and bringing people in, so that, yes, that might be mentoring, it might be internships. I think it'll be almost a unique opportunity to connect in with businesses. So for individuals, you know, keep your eyes peeled. I think for businesses, it's now starting to think about how do we navigate this next kind of 9 months where it might be really hard to get people through traditional means and bringing them in through other ways.
Yeah, really great points both there. Just being mindful of time, I might leave it there. Yusuf, did you have a really quick point you wanted to make?
Yes. One last thing that I want to say was youth people should really do volunteer positions. That one way you could actually develop your skills is to do volunteer positions. Not only will you understand how to work with other people in like a work environment, but you'd also be comfortable and learn key skills like adaptability and things like that.
Great, thank you for that, Yusuf. So I'll leave it there. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all the questions. A lot of really interesting points raised and a lot of really great questions left over. Hopefully we can answer some of those in the report itself. Just about the distribution of the report, it'll be available on the MYAN website, and an email will be distributed to all the attendees to let you know that that's up and available for you to have a look at. Otherwise, Carmel, I'll hand it over for you to wrap up.
Lovely. Thanks, Matika. Wonderful job. She said she was very nervous. We knew she'd do a great job. So thank you very much for curating that. Just a couple of takeaways from me before I say thank you. I think, Ines, what you've just highlighted has resonated with people. So I think that MYAN, with your AIG head and your Migration Council, we might think about a coordinated approach to this mentoring, partnerships and internships role that maybe we could galvanise. So thank you for offering that. There's been a lot of interest. Alison, I think this issue about how we get young people of multicultural backgrounds, particularly refugees, in the agenda for government, I think has been heard. And to David, I think as we discussed earlier, we have more research to do with you. That would be great if we could get Alison to help us fund around the next steps. If I can be some bold or go to government, I think it'd be great work to do that. Yusuf and Fatima, can we thank you very much for your honesty, your ability to really articulate what's going on behalf of yourself and other young people that you work with. I think it's really important. I think what this report has showed and what this panel has showed us is that by investing in outcomes for young people, we invest in that, not only the future, but in the communities, young people and families who are living in Australia today, and that it will be an overall economic benefit for the whole economy. So just a couple of thank yous. As I said to our panel members, from Alison, Ines, Yusuf, David and Fatima, thank you very much. If we can do a little thank you from the audience. Thank you for sharing your time. It's not easy to get in people's diaries. To my co-moderator, Martika, who's done a wonderful job. Thank you very much. I think that you are what MYAN stands for, is that we give young people these kind of opportunities to stand up and do that. Thank you very much. Can I also acknowledge the MYAN team behind the scenes who make this work? They are a very small but dynamic team of staff that work behind the scenes. To Rana, our new manager, to Andrew and all the other staff, thank you for pulling this together. It is a lot of work to pull these kind of things together and to make it informative. And I think what we have learned through COVID is that talking about these things online has probably opened up the opportunity to speak to hundreds of people. So finally, thank you to all of you who have participated, for your very insightful questions and for engaging with us. We will be back in touch. MYAN has more to do now that we will add to our work plan of activities of ensuring that we continue to put the issue of employment for young people on the agenda of government research and employers. So that's it from me. You would have got the link in the chat to the report if you want to download it. It's now available. Otherwise, as Martika said, it will be available on the MYAN website. So thank you, everybody. And we're only 3 minutes late. We've done a great job, team. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.